Thank you, Nina and Ricky. Good evening, everyone. I'm Alma Angeles for NET25 World News. On tonight's headlines. President Donald Trump said the sweeping tariffs that he has imposed on Mexico, Canada, and China may cause short-term pain for Americans. As global markets reflected concerns, the levies could undermine growth and reignite inflation.
No, I'm not concerned. We may have short-term some little pain, and people understand that, but long-term, the United States has been ripped off by virtually every country in the world. So we're going to change that. We're going to change it fast. We're going to make America great again.
And the news starts now. U.S. President Donald Trump admits the sweeping tariffs that he has imposed on Canada, Mexico, and China may cause some pain for Americans. And less than 2 weeks into his second White House term, Trump is defending the tariffs as necessary to curb illegal immigration and the drug trade. And stock traders and the three countries, which are the largest U.S. trading partners, have signaled hope that the trade war will not last long. Thomas I. Likeness for more.
Saturday afternoon, Trump announced a 25% tariff on all Mexican goods and most Canadian products. The only exception is energy from Canada, which has a 10% tariff. Chinese exports will face a 10% surcharge as well. The tariffs go into effect tomorrow. Canada has been quick to respond. Shortly after Trump's announcement, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced tariffs of his own on what he calls everyday items imported from the U.S.
Fruits and fruit juices, including orange juice, along with vegetables, perfume, clothing, and shoes. It'll include major consumer products like household appliances, furniture, and sports equipment, and materials like lumber and plastics, along with much, much more.
Trudeau says while the tariffs will hurt Canada, there will also be consequences in the United States, and he tells Americans Trump is doing them no favor by starting a trade war.
Tariffs against Canada will put your jobs at risk, potentially shutting down American auto assembly plants and other manufacturing facilities. They will raise costs for you, including food at the grocery store and gas at the pump. They will impede your access to an affordable supply of vital goods crucial for U.S. security, such as nickel, potash, uranium, steel, and aluminum.
So, what does the American president think about that? Trump says defiantly that Canada doesn't have anything that America needs.
We don't need them to make our cars, and they make a lot of them. We don't need their lumber because we have our own forests, et cetera, et cetera. We don't need their oil and gas. We have more than anybody.
And while Trump says his strategy will entail some pain for Americans, he does not specify what form it will take or how deep it will be. Best to be stocking up on some painkillers. Meanwhile, Trudeau has some advice for his American counterpart.
President Trump wants to usher in a new golden age for the United States. The better path is to partner with Canada, not to punish us.
That advice Trump will likely ignore. Thomas I. Likeness, NET25 World News.
I Likeness. Thomas, how are Canadians reacting to the tariffs? What's the mood of the people there?
Alma, people are definitely annoyed, and some say they feel betrayed. They thought the U.S. was an ally, our friend. You know, we've had free trade between the two countries for decades, and it's worked well. If this persists, there will be job losses, and there could be a possible recession if it goes on for too long. But a lot of people just don't see the point of it all. Why start a fight over nothing? Like I said, free trade has been going on for decades and it's worked well. Trump claims he's doing this because of the drug trade, fentanyl being smuggled into the U.S. from Canada. Well, in fact, the amount of fentanyl that comes from here is just 1% of what makes its way to the streets of America. The rest comes from China and Mexico. Now, other days, Trump claims the U.S. is being treated unfairly by Canada. He says the trade deficit means that the U.S. is subsidizing the Canadian economy. You know, for someone who claims to have gone to the Wharton School of Business, this is just nonsense. The U.S. isn't subsidizing Canada any more than I'm subsidizing my local grocery store when I buy food. I give them money, they give me a product. Works the same way between countries that trade with each other. America has a trade deficit because it buys more from us than it sells to us. They're not giving us free money. You know, again, we seem to be seeing a repeat of Trump's first term where he likes to sow chaos around the globe. And I fear for his own people because they're going to be hurt as well. Elma?
Are people motivated enough to take action against the U.S., such as boycotting American products?
Elma, I haven't seen any organized efforts yet. Now, we've been hearing about this for weeks. We knew tariffs were coming. But so far, no one has started a boycott campaign, at least that I've heard of. Anecdotally, though, I've heard a few things. A travel agent in Vancouver says a number of her clients are canceling vacations to the United States. Some of that now might be because of the weak Canadian dollar, but others, well, they're seeking alternate destinations, places where our money and Canadians are appreciated. And here's another story. Someone needed to replace one of their appliances in their house, and this person decided instead of buying one that had been made in the U.S., they would buy an import from South Korea. And there are going to be a lot more of these kind of buying decisions as the tariffs that we put on, the ones that we put on American goods, go into effect. There's a lot of choice out there now, a lot of stuff being made in a lot of different countries. America's making a big mistake if it thinks it can survive as an economic island. But you know, Elma, sometimes people have to learn the hard way. Elma?
Thank you, Thomas, for your insight. President Donald Trump said the sweeping tariffs that he has imposed on Mexico, Canada, and China may cause short-term pain for Americans. As global markets reflected concerns, the levies could undermine growth and reignite inflation.
No, I'm not concerned. We may have short-term a little pain, and people understand that. But long-term, the United States has been ripped off by virtually every country in the world. We have deficits with almost every country. Not every country, but almost. And we're going to change it. It's been unfair. That's why we owe $36 trillion. We have deficits with everybody. We help everybody. We've been helping everybody for years. And to be honest, I don't think they appreciate it. So we're going to change that. We're going to change it fast. We're going to make America great again. Well, it could happen. If they do anything, we will. Canada's been very abusive of the United States for many years. They don't allow our banks. Did you know that? Canada does not allow banks to go in. If you think about it, that's pretty amazing. If we have a U.S. bank, they don't allow them to go in. Canada's been very tough on oil, on energy. They don't allow our farm products in, essentially. They don't allow a lot of things in, and we allow everything to come in. It's been a one-way street. We subsidize Canada by the tune of about $200 billion a year. And for what? What do we get out of it? We don't get anything out of it. On Mexico, we've had very good talks with them. And this is retaliatory. This is retaliatory to a certain extent. Millions of people flowed into our country through Mexico and Canada. It will definitely happen with the European Union, I can tell you that, because they've really taken advantage of us. And, you know, we have over a $300 billion deficit. They don't take our cars, they don't take our farm products, they take almost nothing. And we take everything from them, millions of cars, tremendous amounts of food and farm products. So the UK is way out of line, and we'll see the UK, but European Union is really out of line. UK is out of line, but I'm sure that one, I think that one can be worked out. But the European Union it's an atrocity, what they've done.
Now, economists said the Republican president's plan to impose 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico and 10% tariffs on China, the United States' three largest trading partners, will slow global growth and drive prices higher for Americans.
I think it's fair to say that this is a lose-lose trade war. Both US consumers and also Canadian and Mexican households stand to lose. The Tax Policy Center has just put out an analysis suggesting that after-tax US household income could fall by 1% as a result of these tariffs. That's a cost of about $1,000 to the average US household. Say if I am a US household that imports or that consumes Canadian maple syrup, that maple syrup is going to become more expensive, and that's a direct price increase that households will face. But also, if I buy goods that are domestically produced in the US, but that are produced using inputs from Canada, the price of those goods is also going to go up. So for households, really, there's many different ways you can be exposed, but all these effects lead to higher prices. So one possibility is that the higher tariffs are here to stay. The more hopeful possibility will be that governments realize the costs that these tariffs may impose and try to reach a negotiated solution to remove the tariffs. So I think the Canadian and Mexican governments will be trying to talk with their US counterparts and work out what kind of a deal could we reach that would allow both sides to remove the tariffs.
Meanwhile, a supply chain analyst said today that e-commerce companies may be the worst hit from U.S. President Trump's 10% tariff on imports from China, as it also contains a clause that revokes the de minimis duty-free exemption for low-value shipments below $800. Now, Chinese e-commerce giants like Temu and Shein, who have used this loophole to import goods into the U.S., could be the biggest hit. But even U.S. companies like Amazon could be affected. Asian stock markets slumped on Monday after U.S. President Trump's tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China triggered fears of a broad trade war and hit to global growth.
When you look at the executive order that the Trump administration did, it revoked the de minimis allowance for e-commerce goods into the U.S., such as Temu and Shein. So the biggest hit will be those players as well as Amazon, which ship a lot of those goods into the States. The players that will benefit most from this are companies that make those products domestically, or other companies that may make raw materials or other intermediate inputs that go into the supply chains of the U.S. The markets in the region are taking a hit. Every single one is in the red at the moment as of today's opening. A lot of that has to do with the uncertainty, meaning what is the roadmap? Is it the U.S. is trying to negotiate? Does this mean there will be further tariffs around the region because the U.S. wants more domestic manufacturing? It's really uncertain. So until we have a bit more certainty, we'll see some choppiness in the markets. In the China market, when it opens on Wednesday, we expect that it will also be in the red, but industries and companies that are focused more on domestic manufacturing, for example, domestic chip makers or infrastructure plays, we'll see more of that actually have a positive effect because of the domestic support that we're seeing. So the roadmap of tariffs moving forward is we expect that the U.S. will continue to put tariffs on most countries that they have a trade deficit with, particularly large. Think of the European Union, where the U.S. has a trade deficit with. Think of Vietnam, Thailand, these countries, Australia to some degree. And part of that is because the U.S. feels taken advantage of. They are taking our resources and our money, but not necessarily treating us in a fair way. Some of that is market access. Others are just the fact of fentanyl. Right? The U.S. is really unhappy with the fentanyl use because it's killing Americans. And so we're at the point now where the Trump administration feels emboldened to actually do something about it.
Now, ASEAN and other Asian economies could be in for a slowdown if the U.S. ramps up tariffs on China and other key trade partners. An analyst is warning that an even more aggressive protectionist policy could significantly impact regional growth, with ripple effects lasting years. Take a look.
Looking ahead to 2025 this year, we project regional growth to remain steady at 4.2%. Now, this is a slight downward revision from our October forecast of 4.4%, primarily reflecting a more challenging external environment, including in our baseline assumption an increase of US tariff on China in the second half of 2025. For the plus 3 economies, we have revised our growth forecast down by 0.3 percentage points. For the ASEAN economies, growth projection has been reduced by a more marginal 0.1 percentage point. Let me elaborate on our scenario analysis for what we see as the most immediate risk, a more aggressive US protectionist policy. In our baseline scenario, in our baseline forecast, we actually assume a 25% increase in tariff on Chinese imports in the second half of this year. However, given the uncertainty, we have also considered various other scenarios. Let me share with you two scenarios here. One is if the US implements 60% tariff on China and 10% tariff on other economies. Without retaliation, regional growth could be lower by a further 0.1 percentage point this year. Second scenario, and a more concerning one, is if affected economies retaliate in kind. The impact will be substantially worse. Growth could be lower by 0.6 percentage points this year, and the negative effects will accumulate over time. By 2026, 2027, we could see growth being lower by 1 to 2 percentage points. This will be the slowest regional growth since the Asian financial crisis, excluding the pandemic years.
Meanwhile, U.S. top diplomat Marco Rubio has warned Panama to immediately take steps to address U.S. concerns over Chinese businesses operating ports near the canal. Mark Castillo has more.
Panamanian President Jose Mulino says his country's sovereignty over the world's second busiest waterway is not up for discussion. And Trump has refused to rule out use of military force over Panama.
I don't think troops will be necessary in Panama. What Panama has done is terrible for national security for this part of the world. And, 70% of the signage on the Panama Canal was written in Chinese. That's not right. So it wasn't meant for China.
In a Senate hearing last week, U.S. officials said fines and restrictions on Panamanian flag vessels entering U.S. ports could be imposed due to the dispute over the canal. Molino described his meeting with Rubio as respectful and cordial. Molino also showed willingness to review some Chinese businesses in Panama. They include Hong Kong-based CK Hutchison Holdings, which operates ports at both entrances of the canal.
I would say that the most important topics discussed were those related to the Canal Treaty in relation to what President Trump has mentioned about the Chinese presence. In this sense, I voiced a defense. Of course, opening the considerations so that the technical team of the channel, with the one designated by the United States, can converge on this matter and clarify all the doubts that they may continue to have on this matter. We also talked a lot on the issue of Chinese ports in the canal, explaining to them that for the first time in the history of that concession from 1997 to date, such two ports belonging to the same company are audited by the corresponding authorities of the Republic of Panama, and that, as appropriate, we have to wait for that process to end to draw our own legal conclusions and act accordingly.
The contract with CK has been targeted by U.S. lawmakers and the government as an example of China's expansion in Panama. The Americans claim it goes against a neutrality treaty signed by both countries in 1977. Panama's government and some experts reject that assertion, mainly because the ports are not part of the canal's operations and have not represented a security issue. Rubio said last week that China could use the ports to shut down the canal, a vital route for U.S. shipping, in the event of a conflict between Beijing and Washington. Meanwhile, about 200 people marched in the Capitol on Sunday while the meeting was going on. They carried Panamanian flags and shouted Marco Rubio out of Panama. Some burned a banner with images of Trump and Rubio after being stopped short of the presidential palace by riot police. Mark Castillo for NET25 World News.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is due to meet U.S. President Donald Trump in Washington on February 4. The meeting is set to take place amid a fragile 6-week ceasefire that has brought a temporary pause to 15 months of fighting between Israel and militant group Hamas in Gaza. Arlene Ocampo reports.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu left Israel Sunday The Israeli chief is the first foreign leader to visit Trump since his inauguration last month.
The fact that this would be President Trump's first meeting with a foreign leader since his inauguration is telling. I think it's a testimony to the strength of the Israeli-American alliance. It's also a testimony to the strength of our personal friendship.
Netanyahu says the two will discuss a number of critical issues facing Israel and the region.
A victory over Hamas, achieving the release of all our hostages, and dealing with the Iranian terror axis and all its components, an axis that threatens the peace of Israel, the Middle East, and the entire world.
Netanyahu had strained relations with Trump's predecessor, Joe Biden, and has not visited the White House since returning to office at the end of 2022. Arlene Ocampo for NET25 World News.
Now, on November 21, 2024, the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for Netanyahu and his former defense chief, as well as the Hamas leader, Ibrahim al-Mazri, for alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity in the Gaza conflict. Now, the U.S., Israel's main diplomatic supporter, is also not a member of the ICC. Take a look.
Decision to issue an arrest warrant against me, the democratically elected Prime Minister of the State of Israel, and our former defense minister, was made by a rogue prosecutor who's trying to extricate himself from sexual harassment charges.
The arrest warrant is then issued by the prosecutor, and the arrest warrant becomes binding on any state that happens to have custody of the alleged war criminal. That's roughly how it works. It's very hard to enforce an arrest warrant. We've been here before with the South Africans and al-Bashir in Sudan, and there, the court didn't even make an order. It didn't, in fact, refer the matter to the Assembly of State Parties when the South Africans failed to surrender al-Bashir to the ICC. I mean, there's a legal question here and a political question. The political question really aligns around the relationship between diplomacy and law. You sort of lose the freedom to travel. So I think international law and international criminal law works in, mysterious ways. The enforcement of it doesn't always happen in a court. Sometimes somebody's just sitting down with their passport wondering where to go on holiday and discovers they can't go to 56 places, and that's a kind of form of enforcement. And the other thing I'd say is that you do get cases where people are surprisingly detained, sometimes by accident almost. The truth is that only with a change of government, and a pretty radical change of government in both those states, would you get into a situation where Netanyahu or Putin was arrested and surrendered to the ICC. But these things do happen. A week can be a long time in politics, and one can go from being a respected statesperson to being a war criminal. That's what happened to Slobodan Milosevic. He was the president of Yugoslavia and then Serbia. He was a negotiating partner at Dayton with NATO and so on. And then he found himself under arrest for war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide. He died in jail. But so politics shifts, and arrest warrants are forever. So they've got an advantage over politics in a way in that sense.
And the news continues here on NET25. We'll be right back. A new group of hostage exchanges in Gaza has brought relief to families on both sides of the conflict. And among those freed by Hamas is Israeli-American Keith Sigel, released at Gaza's seaport on Saturday alongside two other Israeli hostages.
Israeli-American Keith Sigel is released by Hamas at Gaza's seaport on Saturday, one of 3 Israelis handed over to the Red Cross in the latest exchange. Ofer Calderon, a French-Israeli dual national, was released in Khan Yunis, as was Yarden Bibas. The fate of Bibas's family is unknown. His baby son Kafir and 4-year-old Ariel were the youngest to be taken hostage by Hamas in the October 7th, 2023 attack. His wife Shiri is still missing too. Hours later, Palestinian prisoners and detainees got off buses in Khan Yunis, Gaza, and in Ramallah, in the Israeli-occupied West Bank, greeted by jubilant and tearful crowds. They're among the 183 Palestinians who were due to be released in this part of the exchange. Saturday's handover in Gaza saw none of the chaotic scenes that overshadowed one 2 days earlier, when Hamas guards struggled to shield hostages from a surging crowd. Once again, there was a show of force by Palestinian militants, despite the heavy losses they suffered in more than 15 months of war. At the newly opened Rafah crossing, the first Palestinian patients were allowed to leave Gaza for Egypt, including children suffering from cancer and heart conditions. The World Health Organization's Rick Pieperkorn said evacuations needed to be ramped up for Gazan patients with traumatic war injuries as well as other conditions.
It's critically important that we speed up the medevac outside Gaza. WHO estimates that between 12 to 14,000 critical patients need to be medevaced outside Gaza. So what we need now is medical corridors.
These were rare scenes of joy after so much death. Israel's military campaign in Gaza killed at least 47,000 Palestinians and left much of the enclave in ruins. Hamas's attack, which sparked the war, killed 1,200 people in Israel, according to Israeli tallies. As the fighting has fallen quiet, diplomatic efforts to build a wider settlement have stepped up. Negotiations are due to start by Tuesday on the second phase of the deal, meant to see the release of the remaining hostages, the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza, and an end, at last, to the war.
Floodwaters are rising in North Queensland and authorities are urging thousands to move to higher ground. Now, one person has died after a state emergency service vessel capsized. 5 others were rescued. Australia's Weather Bureau says the heavy rain is coming from a moisture-rich low-pressure system, with up to 300 millimeters expected in just 24 hours. The country has seen frequent flooding in recent years, including record-breaking floods in the Northern Territory last year during a prolonged La Nina event.
I'm asking Queenslanders to do all they can to make sure that you stay safe, and that means listening to warnings, responding as quickly as you can.
We saw 480 requests for assistance for our SES in the past 24 hours alone, and the Chief Officer of the SES informed me it's been their busiest night so far during the response. So the response is not over yet.
We are prepared for a scenario where rivers may continue to rise. We are prepared for a situation where high tides may impact different communities.
When the river bank broke, it just came down Mystic Avenue and wiped out one side of the street. Just everyone went underwater. Everyone's got water through their houses. There's a lot of people down there with no food, no power, obviously.
And before I go, I would like to greet Brother Frederick Santos and Mylene Santos, Sister Mayen Erica Santos, Brother Philip Noel Santos, Brother Peter Joseph Calaguas, Brother Onesto Briones from the locale of EGM Avenue, Pampanga North. Thank you so much for helping us yesterday get home. And also I would like to thank Sister Malu Francisco, husband, Brother Max Francisco, for their very generous accommodation for us. Thank you so much. And with that, we end tonight's broadcast. For everyone here on NET25, I'm Alma Angeles. Thank you all for joining us. Good night.